tuned for the Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Our guests are painter William Beckman and actress Gloria Stroock. Artist William Beckman was born in Maynard, Minnesota. He earned a Bachelor of Arts at St. Cloud University, and in 1968 got a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Iowa. Since then, he's shown in New York's most prestigious galleries: Allen Stone for 10 years with Alan Frumkin, and the last several years with the Forum Gallery, which also has a space in Los Angeles. How did you know, and when did you know you wanted to paint?
As you stated already, I grew up on a farm, and I had no training at all in school. In fact, I really didn't even know painting existed. And I originally took off hitchhiking when I got out of high school in 1960, and hitchhiking across the West, and I thought I was going to be a rancher because I'd grown up on a farm. I loved animals, and I worked my way west, eventually hitchhiking back to Minneapolis, took a job at Control Data Corporation as a draftsman, and I lived by accident right across the street from the Minneapolis Art Institute.
Which is fabulous.
Yes, yes it is.
Fabulous.
And the girlfriend I had at that time, it was her idea. We were out in the park in front of it, just fooling around, and she said, "Why don't we go in?" And I said, "Sure." And
you mean you hadn't been in museums?
I had not. I lived across from this museum for probably 6 months and had not gone in it. In part because this may seem impossible now, but given my background and where I was from, just art had never crossed my mind. It just was not an option.
It wasn't a job.
No one, I didn't even know it. That's right, it wasn't a job, and I didn't even know that it sort of existed, which seems, I guess, now almost impossible. But again, taking her suggestion, we went in. I fell in love with it. Fell in love with painting immediately, and my first reaction was, I can do that. And I started taking night classes at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis.
Oh, that's how.
And so while I was still working as a draftsman, and eventually Minnesota was fairly expensive at that time, and I didn't quite have that kind of money, but I had saved enough as a draftsman, and I went up to the state school. The universities of Minnesota are broken down between the University of Minnesota and the state universities. And I went to St. Cloud, which was just north of the city, and then you already said that's where I got my BA. And I started taking art.
Oh, that's how you started?
Yes, well I had a double major. I had a philosophy major and a art major, and just ball started rolling from there.
And then where did you go once you got your Master's of Fine Art?
Well, actually Iowa, this time of Vietnam, and I had a teaching assistantship at Iowa in 1966. And from 66 to 68, I was at Iowa getting my MA and MFA, and I also met my first wife there, Diana Moore, and we waited in Iowa until my daughter was born, which was on January 14th. And I'm sorry, 15th, because Diana, who was my ex-wife, was born on the 14th, and my daughter's born on the 15th.
Better get that right.
Yes, you know how daughters are. That's correct, yes. And then we waited for her, and 2 weeks later, we loaded ourselves up in a U-Haul and went to New York City.
And then that's where you went? Were you painting?
Well, you have to remember, I grew up on a farm.
Right.
And I had never really lived in a big city.
I know. Well, Minneapolis was pretty big.
Minneapolis is a fine town, very fine town. They have the Guthrie, and they also have, of course, the Walker and the Minneapolis Art Institute. But it's not really a big city in the same sense that New York is.
Oh no.
And my ex-wife was from Chicago, so I was fairly comfortable in a city that size. But again, I had not lived in a city. And
well, what happened to you? Did you have shell shock?
Sort of yes and no. I loved it. I mean, again, I was 24, 25, something like that, and I just fell in love with it. We took a place on First Street, a walk down, and we were there for a couple of months. I ran into Alfred Leslie. Actually, I answered an ad in the Village Voice because I was looking for a loft, And through the ad, I just opened up the door. Constance, who was his wife at that time, answered the door, and the painting he was doing of her in the satin dress, which is in the Whitney, was right behind. He was painting it at that time. And I've been in New York now
Art
for
history.
about, that's right. I've been in New York for 2 months.
Right.
And I'm stumbling into stuff that, for me, were a dream, coming from a country kid from the Hicks, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I subletted that loft, and we were there for a number of years, and on Lower East Side.
But so you were with where all the artists were.
That's right. And
did you just happen into this space?
yes, totally happened by answering an ad in the Village Voice.
Because that's where everything was happening.
That's correct. And in fact, even more than that, at that time, there was a group called the Figurative Alliance, which was sort of all the figure painters, and this is 1969, all the figure painters that were in New York. We're talking Philip Pearlstein, we're talking Jack Beal, Paul George, Chuck Close, Alex Katz. I mean, that group, they were meeting at that time in Alfred's loft. And this is a loft that I was subletting.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Were you always interested in portrait painting? I mean,
yes
figurative?
and no.
Here you are with all these figurative painters. And you showed with all of them in many museums and many shows for the last 20, 30 years.
30 years, yeah. That's going by fast, yes.
So, and figurative painting is very precise work. The way you do it, it's very precise work. So you had to train for it then.
Well, it's another reason I came to New York. You have to remember, schools really don't offer this sort of thing. At least they did not in the 60s. But in the 60s, minimalism and abstract expressionism and that sort of thing. And I actually started, my whole undergraduate school was pretty much abstract or more minimalist. And I still feel that in a painting like this one, there's a carryover of minimalism. I like removing stuff from the field area, or what's called, you know,
the background. That's what I was going to ask you, because many of the portraits I've seen, many of the heads, have just color in the background. There's nothing that puts us anywhere. And why is that?
Well, you said it the best right there. I don't want the painting to be localized. I don't want it to be put to some specific room or a time frame even more. And what I'm after here is really color as a dense form. And the form, and if they're successful, the form can be equal to the figure, and they can carry themselves, they balance each other. If you have material back there, or what I call it stuff, if you just fill it up with stuff, it becomes a distraction. You don't have the dialogue anymore with the figure.
We can put the stuff in the background.
Yes, yes. Exactly.
And what happens is all the colors are different that you put in your backgrounds. But we have to confront you. This is a portrait of you. And I forgot to tell our director I wanted him to dissolve from your face into the portrait and back and forth. But how would you paint a portrait of yourself like this?
They're used with a mirror. I mean,
that what
the real
key, do you hold it?
It's standing in front of me.
Okay, it's standing in front.
I have mirrors of all sizes, but there's usually one depending on the size of the figure. There are some that are much larger than this, and the mirror is in front. And the dead giveaway for most painters, of course, is that the hairline or hair will be parted on the opposite side, which means you're actually in reverse. Now you can use two mirrors and bring it back again, but I am the only person that sees myself this way. Just as you, when you look in a mirror, the person you see in the mirror, you're the only person that ever sees it.
Right.
We always see you reversed, and all of our faces are very asymmetrical.
But if you look behind me into the mirror, you're going to see it.
Yes, if you have two mirrors. If you double the mirror and reverse it. If you're standing behind me and I'm looking in the mirror and you're standing behind me, you're going to be seeing in the mirror the same way I'm looking at myself. That's correct. That's correct.
That's the only time.
Yes. Yes.
Otherwise, we look at each other
precisely
as real people.
And if you're painting someone, and if you're painting someone who has an extremely asymmetrical face, they are usually quite disturbed when they see your first image of you.
Oh, because they don't...
you see, the eye that has been higher or lower, whichever, the ear that's been higher or lower all those years, they've gotten very used to.
And
now that it's flipped,
because it's on the other side and they don't realize that it's...
Because they don't usually see themselves that way.
Now, we talk about this as being cleared of everything so that you deal only with that figure in the front. You also paint landscapes. This is a picture of the farm where you grew up. But I have this catalog, which is another picture of two people. Who are these people?
Myself and Jeannie Zetterstrand, a girlfriend, and this will lead into, of course, Many of my paintings involve the couple. And for me, the relationship between a man and a woman is the most fertile area that I can...
But look at the background. We have a landscape painting of yours here, which is, to me, the same background that you've put in front...
It is.
It is.
Yes, and well, what it is this is an area about 8 miles from where I grew up. It's a town. It's Clare City, Minnesota, and it is well, where as a child we took all of our grain, and I wanted this painting has sort of a forerunner to it in Grant Wood, American Gothic. And this is also the same area. He was from Iowa, or he actually was the head of the Iowa Art School at one time back in the 40s. And the painting, the field area that you're looking behind is, I don't know how to describe it other than it's my childhood, and it's my childhood that I revisit often through painting. I no longer live there. My parents are both deceased, and it's a connection line that I have that is locked in my memory.
But this one is the same woman,
yes,
but with a yellow background. Does it matter what color background? I mean, do you choose the background for certain?
The background, the color has an incredible emotive quality.
That's what I wondered.
Yes, and in fact, if you go through there, you'll see that colors. There's also a painting of her with an incredibly blue background, a cyan blue. And yes, it changes. I work for often easily a year on a painting or portrait. And in that time, there's a tremendous amount of emotional input into a painting, and also the sitter goes through a tremendous change of emotion over a year's period. And I will try to stay abreast of that. The painting will hopefully capture that, and the background eventually talks to me. I don't select it.
I see.
The painting of the figure will ultimately tell me which color. On the colors, in the back of these paintings, they go through maybe 10, 12 different colors as it's being painted.
But if you paint the two pictures that I just showed of the woman, one with the blue background, one with the yellow background, were they sittings at two different times? Did you paint her like 1 year, or did you paint the same woman with a different background?
Actually, Jeannie and I have been together for about 7, 8 years now, I believe, and there are a whole series of paintings, even studies, including her, and that's sort of an ongoing process, and I never work on, say, one painting at a time. So the painting that you're talking about that might be blue, it could have started out earlier than the other. What I'm trying to say is that a painting that starts doesn't necessarily mean that it's finished in that year, even though they're dated that year. They could be, I could start another painting of her, finish it, and then go back to the other one.
But she's sitting for each one of those.
Yes.
It's not the same painting with the background blue and the background,
the sitter has to be there for me often.
Do you use photographs?
No, the photographs, I don't have a problem with photographs, but they don't help me because, well, to be frank, they're dead, and the figure is alive, and I don't ask my sitters to sit still.
Oh.
That's sort of unusual for most people that think that way. They think of a portrait painter, the sitter's going to have to be in a frozen pose.
Right.
I'm just the other way around. I don't care if you move around.
The one thing, because our time is almost up, but I've sat for a lot of portraits, and I've seen a lot of portraits, and I always find a part of that artist, other than his hand, in that portrait. Sometimes he'll put his nose in, sometimes he'll put, have you thought about that?
I guess all paintings are self-portraits.
You have to, don't you?
Yes.
I know you wouldn't put glasses on me, but maybe you would.
There's no question that the artist gets himself into the painting somewhere.
He has to, doesn't he? Yes. And you got yourself into our show today. I'm so glad that you came to visit us. Okay. And I know your work at the Forum Gallery looks exceptional. They're huge paintings, almost bigger than life.
They are. They're usually 20% larger than life.
Is that how?
Between 15 and 20%, the figures.
Well, Bill, William Beckman, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Don't go away, because we'll be right back with Gloria Stroock. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and we're back with actress Gloria Stroock. Gloria was born and raised in New York City, a third-generation person, I might add. She was a drama major at New York. Where were you? At Syracuse.
At Syracuse, I studied,
right.
yes.
She was a drama major at Syracuse, and she followed in the footsteps of many dramatic people in her family.
Oh, yes, my whole family actually came from the theater.
What was it?
Well, my father, whose name was Jimmy Stroock, founded the Brooks Costume Company in New York, and that became the preeminent costume company probably in the United States. Their first major client was Ziegfeld.
Brooks
and
Costume.
Stroock. Yes,
Brooke,
exactly.
Did you change it? Was it
My sister changed it. So Brooks and Brooks Costume did all the major important Broadway shows. And in addition to Broadway, they did the circus and Ice-Capades and the Follies, but really any important show that you can think of, if they had the budget for it, the designers wanted to go to Brooks because they knew
they did the best.
Oh, absolutely. Those costumes inside were as beautifully constructed as they were outside. Then my mother, whose name was Bianca Stroock, was a theatrical stylist. She did modern clothes for the stage.
She was a seamstress or designer?
No, not at all. Designer. And she coordinated clothes. So she would do the entire show, the women's clothes, the men's clothes. She would select them or have them made. And I remember once, it was very cute, she said to my father once, she said, "Darling, will you make," she said, "I need a smoking jacket for Basil Rathbone, and I want a wine velvet smoking jacket." And I guess she'd asked him for a lot of things through the years, and he finally said to her, "Honey, what would you do if I wasn't in the costume business?" She said, "But darling, you are."
So perfect, right?
It was perfect. And I had a sister, a lovely sister who was 15 months younger than I was, and her name was Geraldine Brooks. And she was a beautiful film actress under contract to Warner. She was wonderful. She made her debut with Joan Crawford in Possessed, and then she did a film, Cry Wolf, with Barbara Stanwyck and Errol Flynn.
Very dramatic.
Very dramatic. And
so this
very
is the
dear.
whole
so
background.
that's it. And Geraldine, we called her Jerry. Jerry didn't want to use the same name because I started in the theater before she did.
Oh, I see.
So she didn't want to use the name Stroock, and Brooks was evident. You know, it was Brooks Costume, so she just took Geraldine Brooks, and I think it was a good name.
That's so great.
Right. So
then how did you actually? Coming from this family, they were all working in the theater.
Right.
They were probably actors were coming and going.
There
from
were
your house.
always, and there were wonderful people at our house. I remember Deems Taylor playing piano all the time. There were always musicians and writers and actors and
right in the city.
Right. Oh, I lived in New York City.
Yeah,
yes,
right in the city.
Right in the middle of the city, in the heart of the city. And I think I always knew I wanted to be an actress.
Did you? Were you going? Did you go to study?
I studied at the Neighborhood Playhouse.
Oh, you did.
And my sister studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts.
Oh.
And I went to Syracuse University to study drama. And Helen Hayes came up. She wanted to do a play on the life of Harriet Beecher Stowe. And so they did a production at Syracuse. It was written by two Hollywood writers, Florence Ryerson and Colin Clements. And they decided to produce it in the town of Syracuse and have the producer, Gilbert Miller, and Miss Hayes come and see the production. And I was cast in the production. And she came to see it, and she came backstage, and she said to me, "You're going to have a very lovely career, my dear." And it was very sweet. And many years later, my husband, Leonard Stern, did a pilot on television, and I played a role in it. And so I had the chance many years later to work with Miss Hayes.
Oh, is
So
that right?
that was
and it was produced by Leonard?
Right.
Oh, that's good.
And I had, and Miss Hayes was in it. But the way I started in the acting, actually, after a few years at Syracuse, I wanted to do some summer theater, summer stock in the summer. And there was a show on Broadway produced and directed by George Abbott, called Kiss and Tell. And I thought, well, I'll read. I'd heard there were two girls, and that I would read for the summer stock, for 2 weeks.
Oh, right, to go.
And so I got an appointment, and I read for the play, and I remember coming to the theater, and there were 50 brunettes at one stage left and 50 blondes, Anyway, to make a long story short, I read for it, and the next thing I knew, I was offered the young ingenue, there were two ingenues, the two young women, to go on tour with it. for 10 months. And I said to Mr. Abbott, but I don't want to leave college. I thought it was for the summer, and this was a 10-month tour. And I said, but I don't want to leave, you know. And so he got a message back. The message got back to me was, well, then tell her to stay in New York, go to Columbia University, and she can understudy both girls in the New York production. And I said, but I don't want to go to Columbia University. So to make a long story short, I joined Actors Equity. I was very young. I was 21, almost 21, and that was my first job.
That was the first job?
That was my first job, yes.
Then you were on Broadway. You were in Little Women. You were in...
I did 3 shows on Broadway.
My Sister Eileen?
I did My Sister Eileen in Summer Theater with Dina Merrill.
Oh.
We did that together. And I did Picnic with my own sister, Geraldine Brooks. On Broadway, I did a show called Oh Brother.
Yes. And what was that?
And the New York Times, by the way, that's how they reviewed it. They said, oh, brother.
So did that last very long?
No, it didn't. I did another show that was had a certain, people know about this show, people who are theater historians. It was a show called Truckline Cafe.
I was going to ask you about that because it's an interesting title.
Well, it is an interesting title. It took place, first of all, it was written by Maxwell Anderson, the great Maxwell Anderson. It was directed by Harold Clurman. It was produced by the playwrights.
It sounds very Americana.
Robert Anderson and Elia Kazan produced it.
Totally, right.
And Marlon Brando was a young man. It was his second show, I believe. And I had a very interesting moment. The story of Truckline Cafe, or briefly the background of it, is that it's a cafe on a truck line. And there are little cabins to rent. And Marlon Brando rented a cabin with his wife, and he's murdered his wife. And there's a scene where he confesses to this murder. And what the audience knows, but he doesn't know, is that the man who runs the cafe has called the police. So they know that the police is coming. So it's this very tense moment. Well, this particular day, he was having a lot of problems with Brando. Clurman was, because Brando was marching around and talking downstage and upstage, and he was really having a hard time. So he sent everybody to lunch. But I happened to have brought my lunch that day. So I'm sitting in the wings, and Clurman said to Brando, sit down. And Brando sat, and there was a little ice cream table. And he said, start the scene, and Brando started the scene and started to get up like that, and he said, stay, like a dog, stay. And so he started to do this monologue, and it was like a tornado, and he tried to get up, and every time he'd say, stay, and he was twisting his leg around the table. And
you were sitting there eating your lunch?
And I'm sitting in the wings, eating my lunch, and seeing this incredible performance, just, you know, centering and centering. And when it was finished, Clurman said, you got it, Marlon, don't lose it, go to lunch.
Is that right?
Yes.
He just worked with him till he got it.
But he got it. He just got it. He was such a wonderful director. I remember I came running in on that scene, ordering ice cream and hot dogs or whatever. And so Clurman said to me, Gloria, you have to go to the bathroom. So I'm jiggling around, you know. So I did as I said, I did a few shows, and also I was under contract to Paramount when I was young.
So is that what brought you to L.A.? Or
no,
to the West Coast?
I stayed in New York because I'm a New York lover.
Yes.
And
but
I came to the West Coast.
But you've lived here for so long.
I've lived here for a long, long time now. I came to New York back to L.A. When I was married I am married to Leonard Stern, almost 45 years now.
So you've been here almost as long.
So I've been here since close to 1960, something like that.
But longer than you were in New York.
I don't like to think that. I don't like to think that.
That's
I'm a New Yorker.
That's hard for a New Yorker.
I'm a New Yorker.
And then you started doing TV.
Oh, and then I did a lot of TV in New York as well. I had my own series called The Girls, and it was a story of Emily Kimbrough and Cornelia Otis Skinner, and I played Cornelia Otis Skinner on that. And then
they filmed it there in New York?
That was in New York, and then I also I did a panel show called Down You Go, that was produced by Mark Goodson, same people actually that
Goodson,
did
Todman,
Goodson and Todman,
yeah.
And
they were doing this all in New York.
This was in New York, and the line producer was Shirley Bernstein, Leonard Bernstein's sister. And one day I was a regular panelist, but they would have guests occasionally. There were 4 of us who were 3 regulars and the guest. And one day, I guess a guest fell out, so she asked her brother, Leonard Bernstein, would he help out? He was so competitive. A question would come up. He sat next to me, and he was raising his head, and he kept bumping me. This little game that we're playing on television.
That
it was
is so great.
fun.
One thing that you did take charge of, because I want to mention it, or that you became involved in, is Theater 40,
Yes,
which is in
very.
Beverly Hills, and I
Very
know
involved in Theater 40 is
I saw you in painting churches.
Painting churches, I've done about 8 plays at Theater 40. Theater 40 is a wonderful, probably the oldest non-profit equity theater. It's a professional company, and in Los Angeles. I've done several plays there. The last one, Painting Churches, was a 3-character play, and that was very demanding and very exacting. I never stopped talking. Even off stage, I was talking. I had 7 hat changes in that.
Yes, I remember seeing it. You moved around that set.
I
the
never stopped moving.
Yes,
I did that I had that sense, and the director said, move as you like, and I would move forward and backward and to the side.
Move.
And I was packing up a whole household.
Hats, pushing, and yeah.
And the first act, I packed up silver, because it was all going to Park Bernay. Each piece I was wrapping.
Right.
Then we did books, and pots and pans and books, and finally at the end we had a little dance.
What I thought was, what I wanted to ask you is if you danced and sang.
Well, I'm studying singing now, just because I love it. And I don't dance and sing, although it's interesting you say that, because I do a lot of sculpture, working in terracotta. And someone looking at my sculpture said to me once, are you a dancer?
Uh-huh.
And I said, no.
Well, just because the way you moved on stage, too, I thought I saw that. Have you taken any dancing lessons?
Well, movement, but
no,
I think it's an instinct, just training, I guess. And, but I have, as I said, I'm studying singing because this play was so demanding. I was on stage for, an hour, 45 minutes or so, never stopping. And I vocally wanted to be sure that I didn't lose my voice. I wanted to be strong vocally.
Oh, that's great.
So I studied and took lessons several times a week with a very good teacher, Gail Johnston, who is also an actor. And I'm still working with her.
But that's great, because today you didn't have to be on the show very long. And our time has come to an end.
Oh, my goodness.
But you really did a great job today.
Oh,
we thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
Gloria Stroock. Thank you all for watching our show today. Thanks to the Forum Gallery for sending these paintings over. Keep riding to 777 South Figueroa, 44th floor, and we'll see you next time on the Joan Quinn Profiles. Bye.